teach guitar, teach drums, teach vocals, bass. I mean, like I kind of know how to play everything. I couldn't ever teach somebody how to read music because I never got that. But
we could fix that.
That's basically why I refuse to teach. It's because I'm not going to get any satisfaction from passing along some information to a younger person and then them like get really, really good. Like I'll just be like, asshole. Like that's what I would say to them is because when I was a kid, like I didn't have anybody teaching me. Nobody was teaching me, so I had to learn on my own. And that to me was like the best way to do it, to have to learn by ear, not read music, like just have to learn everything. It's all, trial and error, I suppose, with tuning and stuff.
Of that. Again, well, this is something that we talked about before that I mentioned, I think, was it before the show started?
I don't know. What are you referring to?
Some character that I saw on YouTube recently. His name was like Dan Pena, and I think he's a big business guy or something.
Yeah.
And he was talking, I guess, to a group of people. He's very abrasive. I think that's his shtick.
Good.
That's his thing. But hey, he wants to be blunt and have no confusion about what he's saying.
Yeah.
So I get that. But he was saying something to the effect of, life is not a journey. Life is a process. And you need to learn the appropriate processes that have successfully worked for people if you want to have certain successes in your life. Like if you want to achieve certain things, look at people who have already achieved that and how they went about doing it, model in the same way.
Right.
And there's a lot of logic behind that. He was just being really, really blunt with it. It was funny. But, excuse me. I think that's often true about music. There's a little bit of a push and pull there because there's clearly some process to learning to become a better musician that's proven, that's demonstrated, and you get better when you follow some of those processes. At the same time, there's a lot of personal aspects to being a musician,
right?
And I've learned from so many different people, and I think that's what gets me about being a teacher is I've learned in person from some amazing professionals. Dr. Walter Parks, who was he was like the second in command, so to speak, the percussion guy at Metamora High School for many years, and then I guess the previous band director Mike D'Amico, he had retired, and Dr. Parks took over as the head of the music department there, and that guy just taught me so much stuff. So I'm really appreciative of that. Appreciative of that.
I can certainly understand where you're coming from, but I had teachers too. I mean, their names were like Axl Rose, Rob Thomas, Johnny Resnick,
right.
Like those. I mean, and almost all of the musicians that like I tried getting something from, none of them had classical, regular training. They were just like naturally born with it, or they had to fail a million times before they finally
there's merit in
got
some
it
of
right.
That. There's merit in some of that, and then there's also some stupidity in some of that too.
Of course,
right? And
for every million Rob Thomases, there are or for every one Rob Thomas, there are a million of them that didn't make it that are just as talented and very, very just as good.
It's about like ensuring success if you can. There's some chance aspect to it, and then there's some like mitigating as much of that chance as possible by doing the stuff that works.
Of course.
And so the learning style, I think, is the thing that is variable from person to person, because there is certain information that you're just going to excel with if you have, but how you get that information, I think, is part of the journey aspect of it. And there are various different people I've learned. Like you said, you're learning from some folks like Axl and others that are amazing in what they've done. I've learned that same way, too. I coupled that same kind of thing. Like Neil Peart from Rush was part of the reason I wanted to play drums. My very first teacher, David Weibel, I love that man. He was the drummer for this Christian rock group, this cover band that my mom sang in and played keyboards for.
Oh, nice.
And I would go to rehearsals and sit behind David and watch what he was doing, and I was just floored. He had this awesome drum workshop drum kit. And this was like top of the line Cadillac drums to me. I already knew that was like awesome stuff. He had like all these Sabian hand hammered cymbals and stuff that were just mind blowing. And, I just thought, man, I want to do this. Like I was into the gear first. That was what was really grabbing my ass, because drummers have way cool gear. That's just what we do.
They do.
Most of the instrument for drum set is the stuff that holds your instrument up. You think
Right.
about that. The majority of it is not the actual instrument. It's the stuff that holds the instrument up so you can hit it, right? Cymbal stands, and snare drum stands, a hi-hat. The hi-hat. The hi-hat's one of the weirdest instruments in the world because it's these two cymbals that come together and clang together, or you can hit them closed, all that fun stuff. But like the majority of the hi-hat is the stand that holds the cymbals and allows you to move them up and down, right? That's the funniest part. If you have like awesome drummers like, say, this jazz great Max Roach, go look him up on YouTube and watch him play, look up Max Roach hi-hat solo, and you'll see this cat, like, using not just the cymbals, but the entire stand, right? Guys like Buddy Rich would do the same thing, you know? All these cats knew how to use the whole drum set as an instrument. So that blew me away, learning about stuff like that. But, you know, I got into people like Neil Peart thanks to some of my teachers. I got into people like Terry Bozzio, who played for Frank Zappa, among numerous others. Billy Ward is an amazing drummer, and that guy thinks about drums like in a very different way from a lot of other people I've seen out there, you know. And so all these people have been vicarious teachers.
I'm gonna tell a story that goes against everything that you just said.
That's why I love this. It's just flat contradicting.
So when I wanted to play the bass, when I wanted to learn to play the bass, it was because I thought Duff McKagan was the coolest looking guy in Guns N' Roses.
It was all based on coolness.
Which happened to be my favorite band.
Right on.
And he was just the coolest looking guy. He was always the tallest. He wore leather gloves. He smoked. He would wear sunglasses indoors. He had long blonde hair. Like, I was just enamored with this guy, and his interviews were just so awesome because he was completely hammered the entire time.
Wow.
And
yeah.
I mean, so I want to learn how to play bass. My parents were like, well, if we're going to buy you a guitar, we're going to start off on a really cheap one, and you're going to have to take lessons. You're going to have to stick with it.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're not going to upgrade your guitar. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Good deal. Sweet. Got my bass. For those of you that don't know, Duff McKagan was a chronic pick user playing bass, which
wanted that sound.
A lot, and that sound is what I loved about Guns N' Roses. Like, I loved the grittiness to a bass guitar playing a pick. And I didn't know it at the time, but that's why. But anyway, you could probably ask a lot of the drummers that you're referring to and ask them their bass counterpart if they would ever use a pick. And a lot of them, I would be willing to wager, would say, absolutely not. You can't, because I went into my first bass lesson with my bass teacher or whatever, and he absolutely would not allow me to use a pick. So I stuck with him for 2 lessons, just long enough for him to teach me how to play Sweet Child of Mine, that bass solo at the beginning, and then I quit. I was like, that's an asshole thing to do coming from a teaching standpoint. No, you're not allowed to play your instrument the way that you want to. You have to play it the way that I want to. That's a shitty teacher, if you ask me.
I hear
that
what you're
teacher
saying.
can go kick rocks for all I care. And that really turned me off to ever taking anybody's advice or listening to anybody or this, that, or the other. The fact that
you don't like the dogmatic approach there.
Well, I mean, it would be the same thing if it was reversed, and he was like, "No, you have to play with a pick." Like that would piss you. You shouldn't. That's not like you said that there's a drummer that uses all parts of the hi-hat to make a drum beat out of it, and it's like, I'm sure that there are people that say, "No, you can't do that." The idea of somebody saying you can't do that when it comes to something as expressional as music is insanity to me, and you need to be committed, and you need to be shipped away to some Shutter Island where we never hear from you again. Like, that's just my opinion on, because if somebody told Duff at some point, hey, you can't play with a pick, can you imagine that solo? I've listened to myself play that solo on my fingers. It doesn't have the same sound.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's an asshole thing to say.
Okay. What you're just mentioning there is a problem that I even recognize going on in music education at times. There is an approach that's much more by rote, that's much more, like some people would almost term like more the classical approach to music education, right? And when you're teaching an instrument.
Now, are you talking education, teaching an instrument, or teaching the history?
Teaching the instrument.
An actual instrument,
right,
okay.
like teaching people to have a facility on a particular instrument.
Okay.
There are more by rote specific methods and things, which are useful because you learn, there's a technical side to playing, but there's also an instinctive side. There's the musical side, right? And technique is not music.
Right.
Technique is what allows you to make music,
Right.
right? So there are people that understand this difference and how both of them are important. There are people that kind of lean more toward one side or the other, though everybody has a little bit of both, right? You know, some just are heavier in one than the other, or some people are almost all one way. Like classical musicians, for example.
Right.
They're very, very focused on, I'm going to play the dots on the page
Right.
with the appropriate technique that's been called for.
Right.
Someone's going to tell me what they want me to do, right? And there are those who, I've seen this in guitarists a lot, who maybe they have a lot of the technical background. They understand how to make a lot of different ranges of sounds with their instrument, but they play from the heart. They're playing what they're inspired to play. They're putting an inflection here or there because that moment draws it out of them. There's a particular tone or a sound
It makes them want that particular sound.
Yes, and that's more of the musical aspect, I would say, the more the like instinctive thing that's very personal. A good musician on whatever instrument, right, understands how to marry these things together. And I teach my students in that way. I'm like, okay, yeah, there are technical things that you need to do to get your body to do what you want it to do, right? But there's also like an experimental instinctual side that you've got to exercise as well. I had all my students setting up the drum kits for a while where they had like the high tom over the bass drum kind of angled toward them a little more, and the snare drum at slightly an angle toward them. All their cymbals kind of raised and at an angle kind of thing. And then more recently, because I did this myself, I had them switch everything where almost every single part of their drum set was almost flat, right? Their toms were raised up a little bit, but they were just flatter on the surface. So they had to, it forced them to have to use a certain technique in their hands more and exercise that more, because it was going to get them to use their fingertips more and exercise those muscles. And I said, try this. I'm not saying it's the only way. I'm saying it's a way I want you to try right now because it's going to make you more awesome and more capable of playing more stuff. And if your teacher had approached it saying, I'm not saying you can never play with a pick. I'm saying I want you to try building your finger muscles up because it's going to make you better, giving you the reason behind why he was doing something.
I still would have
getting you into it. I'm not saying you would never play with a pick, but imagine you'd been able to play with a pick and your fingers equally as well. Even if you wanted to primarily hear the pick sound, what if you had both of those facilities at your command?
And you know what? And eventually, later in my life, I realized the positive, the benefit to playing with your fingers, because some songs call for that.
Exactly.
And I learned that, and I had to train. And dude, I mean, I had to learn.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard, and it took a lot of work, but I taught myself how to do it so I can appreciate it. But at the same time, somebody's coming in to learn an instrument. Just the very first lesson, let them do what they want, how they want. Let them get used to. Let's teach each other la di do 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 da. Like let's work on those things. You can play it however you want. When it comes to inspirational music, like I never understood why the only way he wanted to teach me was, hey, bring in a song, I'll teach you how to play that song.
He probably had less respect for the way that people play with a pick, because sometimes people's egos get into. I'm not knocking
there's
your teacher,
no room
but that's
for ego
what
when you're a teacher.
Well, and I think that happens too, especially when you have that background.
In a music
you think,
environment.
There's like the right way. There's a lot of people from more of the classical background that think this is the right way to play it.
Right.
There's people from the instinctual kind of background. You know, some would say more like the jazz kind of background. There was this big push between the jazz trained musicians and the classical trained musicians. And the jazz side has a lot more of that instinct aspect to it. But there was this thing like the classical guys have a chip on their shoulder. Did they think they're better than us? You know, that this is real music and that stuff's just playing.
There's no room for ego in music. I don't
agree.
I don't
it
see
happens
any.
all over the place.
I know it does. I know it does. I was guilty of it for a large portion of my music
career.
Man,
we can go on these questions.
But no, I don't have. See, I'm actually getting really fucking mad at this guy who taught me how to play bass, and I want to find him on Facebook and at least message him and be like, look, man, I know you don't remember me, I know you don't give a shit, but fuck you, because to this day, I still think about how much more I could have learned had it not been for you being my way's best, bro. We need to do it my way. That's not what a teacher should do. I understand what you're saying with changing up the drums and trying different things, but And I really don't think that in my mind in 8th grade, if he was said, hey, man,